Okay, before I start this vlog, I do have kind of like a small thing that I do want to tell you a little bit of heads up. Is that, well, looks like my phone is going through is it's on life support kind of phase. So I mean, it still works, but now it's going that once in a while it automatically restarts, kind of like no way or another. And of course, repairing by replacing the part, it kind of costs like $400. So honestly, now I'm kind of like on I kind of trying to find a way to buy a new phone. Not necessarily have to be an iPhone, but in the meantime, that's gonna affect a little bit the way I do my videos. I'm gonna still use my iPhone sometimes. Sometimes I pay attention using the reflection of of my television over there to see if it doesn't restart or not. And so if that happens, I gotta go back, doing some editing here and there that to fix some of those stuff. So I'm gonna apologize if things get awkward. It luckily doesn't happen, or probably I'm gonna return on making my vlogs using my camera, the photo camera that I used previously, in which this one actually had kind of like the problem that it doesn't record videos, on the long run, and I usually use that time, to stop every 10 minutes or so that my head, and in order to avoid that problem. And this is why I edited, that sealed it up together to make kind of like a long video. That is technically my technical plan. I have my kind of a little bit of a heads up about the quality of my vlogs. But on the other hand, I just went to watch the newest A24 movie named Death of a Unicorn, in which the premise in itself, it was enough to catch my attention. And so, because I gotta give it credit that whether it is a hit or a miss, A24 kind of comes up with some interesting stuff. I'm not exactly kind of saying that I'm kind of like the biggest fan, but let's say that some of its movies are kind of like quite in the interesting level. And Death of a Unicorn, considering that it kept my attention on the premise alone, is the reason why I went there. Because funnily enough, ever since I saw Cabin in the Woods, there is this kind of like this scene in which when the whole rampage happens in that movie. One of the most peculiar scenes that caught my attention is when a guy gets stabbed by a unicorn. And in my head, it was like I always wanted to see a horror movie involving a unicorn. So when I saw the trailers of Death of a Unicorn, I thought that this is the movie that I wanted to see many years, and I went there. Even thought how I was kind of like how can I say, bracing myself, and of course it had a conflict with another movie that I wanted to watch, which is The Working Man with Jason Statham. But lo and behold, and the funny thing is that I had a little bit of difficulty going there because the theater where I went was a little bit packed. So here I am. I went there. I watched the long-awaited funeral, because it's about Death of a Unicorn. And well, not gonna lie, I was disappointed. I was not exactly a fan of that one. Is the best way I can describe this movie? It was just a wasted potential, because it had some of the good elements, but unfortunately, this is one of those movies that it wanted to bring out kind of like a satire, but it kind of went a little bit too much on the nose on using cynicism as a satire, and to the point that it kind of mars the whole experience that you either want to be kind of like a social satire, but unfortunately the characters are so annoying and so unlikable that you feel like the comedy was a little bit too much on your head, and you can't even like the lead because the lead wasn't even good enough. But you know that what they were trying to do, but it was a little bit too on the nose that even when the movie wanted to put some kind of emotion into it, it was so sloppily undercooked that it felt that even when the movie wanted to shoehorn in some kind of emotional moment, it was so undercooked that it didn't felt earned. And so so I'm kind of like in the middle ground that I want to find. If I wanted to like this movie, I want to appreciate this movie, but for the long run, I kind of say that I might respect this movie, but I can't. It just didn't work. It just didn't work out. And so let's go on with the premise, in which the premise basically centers on this rocky relationship between a father and a daughter, which are played by, of course, Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega, in which they are in the road. They're going to meet these kind of like these pharmaceutical CEOs in the middle of in a kind of like a cabin in the woods, where a lot of this rich CEO lives. They're gonna go deal with something because the head of the family of that place, he's also suffering with cancer. I got another phone then. This is kind of like a temporary thing, but it will help me watch some of the things that I forget. I didn't turn on my computer yesterday. Okay, but anyway, they're on the road, and then suddenly they run over a unicorn, which is kind of like a rarity. And well, the unicorn basically is dead, and Paul Rudd makes it kind of like a mercy kill, splattering blood all over it, and well, for some reason they decide to bring the body. And well, from here on, things get a little bit, bad because they find out that the unicorn blood has healing properties, and they decided to exploit it. Little that they know is that you ever heard the myth, even the Harry Potter lore, saying that once you kill a unicorn because it's something pure, you're gonna pay the consequences. Well, in this case, apparently the parents of the unicorn are angry, and they decide to exact revenge on the people who wants to exploit the unicorn's the dead unicorn's body, because that's what happens. So in the get-go, you can tell that there is the promise of probably one of those movies that it's kind of like tongue-in-cheek. You deal with something that you shouldn't, and there it is. And then, of course, it became kind of obvious that this movie wanted to make a satire and an allegory to pharmaceutical. And what a way, considering that they pick up that one of the biggest mythologies on resources is that unicorn blood has healing properties, unicorns and the healing properties is kind of like a big thing, on unicorn mythology, in which it is an European mythology. Unicorn, they're horses with horns. They have magical properties, and people don't exactly know is that the unicorn is not exactly the pure Pacific creature that you kind of see, especially in most of the media. Sometimes they do it, for to say that, oh, this is cute or something like that. But when you go a little bit in deep, these creatures are actually more aggressive than what you think. Of course, that there's also the kind of like the the fantasy in which they say that sometimes, and I mean sometimes, they become tame and let be ride by pure maidens. But they don't realize that when it's about pure maidens, it's not. They don't mean about a woman that is good, or kind of like a kind soul or something like that. When they mean about pure woman, they mostly they're actually mentioning about their virginity. Yeah, I know how it sounds, but I'm just stating, one of the few, lores on the mythology of unicorns. And well, as you can tell, this is part of kind of like the story that it goes through. And if you kind of notice, going back to the movie, as a satire, it's a dark comedy. It is kind of like going into the laugh, and unfortunately, it kind of comes into conflict because it wanted to showcase that there is a rocky relationship between father and daughter, in which they kind of have an arc, but it's barely mentioned, and we just only stuck with seeing all these people. Let's say that. I'll get to that, but my God, if you kind of hate the people from that very old movie that many people forgot, which is called You're Next, you're gonna hate these kind of people. Let's start, of course, with our protagonist, which is none other than Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega. Let's start out with Paul Rudd, in which he really starts out kind of like. I like Paul Rudd, but unfortunately, they kind of make him kind of like this unlikable, wormy guy who, well, he just tries, to going with the deal and trying to appease with the rich people in order to, kiss their shoes and all that stuff. The way he's handled it kind of makes him kind of like an insensitive jerk, and even sometimes a little bit too much of an asshole with her daughter, in which he basically acts like when he turns into the worst aspect of Jerry Smith from Rick and Morty. And you know that Jerry Smith, the scene in which, in the episode of Pluto, where Jerry and Morty have kind of like this rocky moment. And you remember when Morty is like, hey, you know that Pluto is not a planet and all that stuff, and Jerry, he just ditches his son just because he wants to look good. Kind of a little bit like that. Kind of like a little bit like that. But honestly, I could get a little bit behind him because, well, he's the adult, and sometimes as a father figure, he has to do, sometimes father figure has, to do not very good things in order to bring some economic stability to the plate and all this stuff, considering that, well, his wife is dead. But not Jenny Ortega, because Jenny Ortega, she is my least favorite character in this movie, and I know that people like her a lot and because of her movies, but I only saw her more in Beetlejuice, and honestly, personally, I find Jenny Ortega very overrated. She can be a good actress, yeah, but I don't think that she's kind of like great, and this movie doesn't do that much any favors, because in the way she was portrayed, she's basically kind of like that more complaining, angsty Lisa Simpson, in which she is kind of like this. I think she's kind of like an arts major. She always, you see her use kind of like a lot of rings and her hair dye, and the nose and all this stuff, and the way she kind of acts is so angsty and so kind of like one of those, one of those teenagers that they have kind of like this attitude that you just want to slap them sometimes, kind of like that, and she kind of becomes kind of like the girl who she always thinks that she is always right, and the movie kind of the movie wanted to side with her, but her attitude and the way that she kind of wants to cram us and saying everyone, hey, look at me, I know all the answer, I know I'm right, and all this stuff, and she kind of comes off kind of like a kind of annoying. It's so, in a way, I didn't connect too much for her, considering her things, but but in a way, there's also, how can I say, there's also the family, the rich family, in which it comprises. Okay, we got. There's Richard E. Grant, Tia Leone, and of course the son, which is Will Poulter, in which if if there's kind of like a one-dimensional caricature of the rich people, they're dumb and evil. These are one of them, and and since they're pharmaceuticals and they want to exploit a unicorn, because of they're gonna make us rich, we're gonna see immortality and all these lines and the way they talk is so cringy that honestly. Some people might find some humor, and I mean, some of the audience really kind of big laugh, and I was like, am I supposed to laugh? Maybe I didn't get it, but most of them is kind of like the big joke is like, I'm rich, so I don't know what that means, so I'm evil. So also I'm evil. That's all. That's kind of like the thing that I seen kind of like this. This kind of makes it a little bit stereotypical, which again, I'm not exactly kind of like against when you kind of use it cleverly, but this movie wanted to kind of make kind of like a point, and I found it a little bit something like been there, done that kind of scenario, and it doesn't help that. It doesn't help that sometimes they really wanted to go improv in moments in which even some of the jokes fall flat, like and showcase that they're stupid because they watch it and everyone like, oh, what the hell is this thing? Oh, this is a horse. Yeah, but you don't know. This horse has this horse has a thing on it. And they drag it onto Jenny Ortega. It's a unicorn, and they were like, oh. Yeah, that kind of humor, and they kind of become kind of like the very, very antagonistic people, and it's almost like it kind of becomes kind of like the worst aspect of the Simpsons, where again the moment in which Lisa Simpson is she makes the investigation out there. In this case, investigation means you go to Google. Yeah, modern times. They go to Google and say, hey, I found this and all this stuff, there's something about it, and well, they're like, oh, you know what, maybe something, and they're kind of Twitter neither not, and they say, we don't hear you, something like that. The typical Simpsons kind of humor, or bad Simpsons kind of humor that you find. And so, although there are some other characters, I'll say, but they kind of barely need to mention. For example, how can I say there is... let's say that there's kind of like the gatekeeper, the doctors that investigate and all this stuff, and well, when they got into it, and I don't feel like explaining kind of like a little bit too much. Maybe I will say that despite everything, maybe the character of the rich son, what was his name again? Will Poulter's character. The Will Poulter character who plays the rich son of the family, he's pretty much kind of like the rich kid. He's actually is kind of like the closest thing to notice that he gave a genuine acting, because he looks like he's having fun, but honestly, you might find an amusement depending on how much you can tolerate, this kind of humor that some people will hit, some people don't. I don't think that I am kind of like going into it. I'll talk a little bit more when I get a little bit into the themes and talking to the movie, but I'll have to jump about the cinematography, in which I will say that it's not exactly, a kind of like big. I'll say it has to kind of like the good shot of like any A24, but I do have to mention about the unicorns themselves, because I can be forgiving about how they look, but let's be blunt. They don't look too good. Because the unicorns, they really look. You can really notice the CGI. the CGI, the blending between the unicorn and the CGI and well, the real life aspect of the cinematography doesn't feel too good, and you can tell that it doesn't feel too organic. I think that there's kind of like a good shot on a rear window of the unicorn, laying on the road, but I think it's mostly that they just I think probably it's because they really took a shot of a real horse and then Photoshop it to look like a different color. But you really notice, the unicorns that I mean, they're big, and I know that making it, I think that this is one of those movies that maybe I makes me question what will happen if you could actually use puppetry. But now they're relying on CGI. Even the blood they have CGI. Although for credit where it's due, I do actually like that they did stick a little bit with the imagery of how unicorns look, in which unicorns, they're big, of course they have their horns there, but they also have a little bit of a goatee. They have a little bit more fur than what people think about it, and the tail is not horse-like, but it's more kind of like how can I say it? A little bit more kind of like a side of the lion and all this stuff, and also the hooves are a little bit. It's not like a horse. It's kind of like bi-hooded, and it has some fur into it, and I also, again, I give it the respect that they went kind of like the darker side of the unicorn lore, which this one I kind of also give it kind of like a respect into it. And now let me talk about all the other elements that come to my mind about this movie. Like, for example, for starters, I understand that they wanted to go with the theme about pharmaceuticals and how they treat medicine in this case. In this case, how can I say that? They use the unicorn. They find that it can cure cancer. In this case, like it cures. One of the characters has cancer, and they get cured, and they decide to, hey, let's exploit it so we can get money and all that stuff, and they have kind of like this one-dimensional kind of like talk, and that they don't care about anyone and all that, and well, they even have and then of course they think that, okay, you work for me, you work for them kind of attitude. They think that they're highly superior. They even kind of like in a cartoonish way. And even again, the son, he finds out that he gets smarter because he used the dust of the unicorn horn to use it as cocaine. It's like, oh, no, I'm becoming smarter all the time because medicine can also be used as kind of like recreational opioid or something like that. And it's just me rambling about what I kind of get for the movie and expressing it. If you kind of disagree, I can get it, but this is what I've kind of noticed when they wanted to make the satire of it. And for that part, I'm actually kind of like welcoming. I just wish that the movie was a little bit kind of like smarter in a way. Maybe not exactly. Maybe it could have been kind of like dumb fun. But I wanted to work kind of like the jokes get better, but also making the character. How can I say the characters a little bit kind of like more sympathetic, but it didn't, because honestly, the whole movie still kind of remind me of the annoyance of Your Next. But at least I can tolerate Your Next, because at least in Your Next, there's at least one character who is kind of like the main character. There is this one character who actually felt like you root for her. Yeah, in this one, nobody, you can't root for nobody. Not even to Paul Rudd or Jenna Ortega, who are supposed to be the main character. All of them are, you kind of have kind of to deal with the warmy father or the how can I say, the angsty, whiny girl who she always thinks that she's right, and all this stuff. Although I'm gonna give a little bit of credit to that because they're kind of, it shows a moment in which they wanted to showcase it that she can be wrong also, but honestly, but then kind of like the movie kind of goes, I don't know, something like that. And okay, now I think I'm gonna talk about the problem with the whole emotional thing. Is that it felt undercooked. They wanted to kind of believe that Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega are characters that they lose their mother, and because of that they become rocky. And for the majority of the movie, there's almost like nothing. We don't get nothing about that. We don't learn more about it, and it's kind of like a cliche thing that it doesn't feel kind of like earned. And sometimes when the moment happens, it gets interfered by either Jenna Ortega or Paul Rudd kind of ditching each other because they get away from their personalities, or sometimes one of the rich antagonists comes up and say, hey, how's it going? How's it going? I'm making a joke out of it. So that's why even when this thing kind of comes during the climax of the movie, this is where you don't feel it, that it's earned. And even in that moment, it kind of feels like it kind of comes to a stop, and even the way it was executed in the tone, it didn't work. I mean, I am up to, I like, having whiplashes on tones and all this stuff, but I think that this is kind of like a double-edged gamble that you have to earn. You have to earn it, if it works or it doesn't. Sorry that I made that movement. It's that, again, I'm just checking the reflection to see if this doesn't restart anything. Oh yeah, I kind of also forget that the whole movie's pacing is that you have to deal with them kind of like for like 40 minutes or so, and when the unicorn finally make their rampage, this is where the movie actually kind of starts to pick up a little, but it felt a little bit too, it feels kind of like a little bit too late into that. And by the way, I think that this movie also didn't quite kick it during the end. Oh, I forgot one thing, because there is one aspect of cinematography that it blew me away on how can I say, how careless they were. But maybe it wasn't on a mistake, because it happens almost during the climax and the ending, in which there was during the climax, things they have all the events that's kind of happening kind of like at night, at dawn, almost like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or something like that, and then it comes kind of like a moment in which the main protagonists, they separate, and one of them decides to, hey, come here, or something like that. And the whole lighting and the whole thing, it really feels like it's still at night or something like that. And then out of the blue, almost like in an instant, the next moment they go for the next part, it's already morning. Already morning, with all the very bright, not like it's how can I say, it's almost it's not like it's dawn. It's not the dawn. It's suddenly kind of like 10 a.m. So that gave me a little bit of a whiplash and something like that, and then it was like, okay, so things happened so morning came very, very fast. Okay, I think I already talked enough about Death of a Unicorn, and this movie, it was more disappointing, I'll say. I can't even mourn it as a terrible movie, nor I can't even celebrate this life like like one of those respectable funerals. I'm just kind of like a little bit kind of like the middle of the road, that I do appreciate what I wanted to do, but the cast was it didn't sit right. I found it kind of like it's annoying more than anything. I can't. Honestly, I can't recommend highly out of it. Maybe as a rental, if you're curious to see if it works for you, it can work. But at the end of the day, I don't think that this is a movie that, well, I don't think that The Cure was worth it.